Hi everyone, welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is episode 151. My name is Matt, and this is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. In this week's episode, what I'd like to do is reflect upon the conclusion of the ARISS contact with the International Space Station. Now, for those of you who may have missed it, last week's episode of the podcast, I put out the audio recording from that contact, episode 150. But you can also go on YouTube. It's available, the live stream, from the MrpTechreviews YouTube page. Just search ARISS, ARISS, contact, Moriah Central School, MORIAH. And it should come up, the live stream video from last week. The live stream was actually pretty well done. I was really kind of impressed on how it turned out. I'll get into that in a little bit, but I want to take a giant step back now, and I want to talk about the project as a whole. So this is concluding 15 months of work on not only my part, but several of us here at the school district that I work at. And I couldn't have done it without those people's help, especially in the days leading up to the event. So, as many of you know, this whole thing started when we put together an amateur radio club here at the school. And the local amateur radio club in town was able to donate a radio and a few other things to help us get started. We contacted some local organizations, and we were able to get some coax cable for the antenna donated to the school, and we had to purchase a few things like an antenna and such, but it was a very helpful experience having those people be included in this project. So once we started once the radio was actually installed here at the school, we started making contacts almost immediately. And eventually we were connected to the IRLP network that's all on the East Coast here in the United States, called the East Coast Reflector. And as time went on, we started researching what else we could do, and we heard that we could contact the International Space Station through amateur radio. So that was our goal, to be able to talk with astronauts as the space station was flying. And the cool thing about that is that as someone who is recently involved with amateur radio, I mean, I've known about it for years, but somebody who hasn't had a lot of experience with it, but is willing to help the local community. It was a fun project to start out with. As time went on, we learned about the application process. We learned about what we needed to do, the recommended setup, recommended requirements and such. And we filled out the application, which we knew right away was built specifically to weed out schools that maybe couldn't do this or didn't have the perseverance to do something like this. The application process was a lengthy one, and we knew that wasn't by accident. It took us a good 8 hours worth of work, one full day of work to just fill out the application. So immediately, we sent it in the very first day, the very first opening, the very first window of acceptance for the application. So we sent it in, we had it all ready to go. And we had to wait about a month and a half, and we later found out we were one of 7 schools that were selected for this. After which we were assigned a mentor, and that mentor, we were assigned, I believe, the first week of July. And we immediately sent our equipment plan in. We were ready to go. We sent everything in that we needed. And then it was a waiting process. We didn't hear anything back until September, when things started to roll again. And from September to December, things got quite stressful because on the ARISS website, they had a recommended ground station. We wanted to do a direct contact, which would have been from our radio to the International Space Station. And we were willing to learn and do what it took to get that to happen. There was some confusion on the terminology on the website being a recommended ground station setup turned out to be more of a mandatory ground station setup. What we had, because they also required a backup station, we had all the requirements for a backup station. In fact, we had 3 backup stations ready to go here at the school. So we thought we were, overqualified for contacting the space station. And there were some things that we needed. We needed satellite tracking software, which there's actually something called gpredict for Linux that is free. So we were basically ready to roll with that, and we just had to have a learning experience and learn how to get it to happen. So I messed around with gpredict. It seemed pretty straightforward. It seemed pretty simple to be able to track a station. The one problem that we didn't have an antenna rotator that would track the space station as it flew across the sky. So we tried to contact a few people in the area that were more experienced at tracking satellites, and there was a few people we had in mind. There was one person that lived in the next state across. I mean, we're basically on the border of the state of Vermont, and there was someone who worked for Verizon who was willing to help us out. And but then he realized it was about an hour and a half drive, and he just couldn't get away from work to do that. So we then in late December, early January, we decided to switch to the Telebridge contact, which is still amateur radio, but in this case we're using a mediator who we call in, and they relay the signal to the space station using radio. And it made the process a little bit easier for us in the long run. Wasn't quite exactly what we wanted to do, but the end result was the same. So we were fine doing that. It got to the point where we were ready to roll. And the ARISS project actually lent us some equipment so that we could not only contact the space station, but we could pump the audio through our sound system in the auditorium, and it was just going to work out quite easily. I got the little box PBX Innkeeper in February, I believe, and immediately ran into a few issues that I wasn't aware that we needed. And our original contact date was the first week in September, or first week in April, basically. And with that, it was sort of crunch time, and I really needed to make sure all of this equipment worked. So as time went on, I felt like there was a massive time crunch. And after 4 or 5 attempts and hooking up everything, basically we figured out what the issue was on how to get everything to play nicely in our auditorium, because we also upgraded our auditorium sound system and equipment at the school in January. So there was a lot happening looking back. I mean, new speakers, new powered amplifiers, new soundboard, new wireless system so that the soundboard could be run with an iPad, new floor monitor wiring, and it was a pretty massive undertaking. So with that just being concluded, and now going and trying to learn about everything that we had so that we could make it work, took a little bit. And finally, we were able to figure out all the issues. It was just a couple of things that we knew would work very well. And it was trying to figure out how to get everything to play nicely. And once we did that, actually, the biggest thing was you have to connect a phone to this system. And so every time I tried this, I used a phone at the school, and I could get a dial tone, and I would call a friend or a family member, and it would work. It would work for one thing, but to try to get the sound through the auditorium sound, it wasn't working. And finally, I just realized it's probably this phone that's causing the issue. And once we purchased a new phone, everything worked great. So really, it was a lot more stress than it needed to be. So the next thing after that was setting up OBS for the live stream. And basically, I wanted this to look really nice. I wanted it to be something that students could look back on in the future and watch this and be proud of what they accomplished. So I wanted the live stream to be maybe not the best that's out there, because I'm sure that there are really nice videos out there, but I wanted it to be more complicated than just being a single video camera with a shot of the stage and the kids on the stage. I wanted it to be a little bit more professional looking. So it became an adventure for me to get the live stream to actually look really nice for this particular event. The only way that I could get it to do that was using my Mac, because I wanted to use not only a video camera, but I also used an iPhone and a webcam at the same time to have multiple camera angles. So we had a video camera looking at the stage, we had my iPhone looking at the audience, we had a webcam for the students asking questions, and then we had several scenes in OBS, one for the astronauts' response, one for tracking the space station, the other, actually, and at the very last minute, ARISS gave us a link to the live stream, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. So got OBS working pretty nicely. Everything kind of came together, and we realized that I sent in, hey, everything's working. We're ready to go for contact in the first week of April. And I got an email back saying, first week in April, we rescheduled you to April 29th. And I was, oh, okay, that's no problem. That's good to know. So we got rescheduled because of the switch from direct contact to telebridge contact. But I apparently was not notified of that. So then from April 29th, we got rescheduled again to May 6th. Shortly there afterwards, just because of a couple of different things that were happening. We weren't aware of the 29th. So time rolled around. We're ready for May 6th, and the SpaceX rocket launch was delayed, and that basically threw off the astronaut schedule for contacting or for capture of the Dragon capsule. And so we got bumped to May 8th or 9th. I can't remember now at this point. And they were trying really hard. And this is when I really started to find what ARISS was all about, because that week, the first week in May, we must have been 4 or 5 different people working over the weekend, working late hours at night to try to get this to schedule later on that week. And we had schedulers at NASA working with us. It turned out that Thursday, which would have been the only time we could do it, was a crew holiday on the International Space Station. So we got bumped sort of indefinitely at that point. And basically at that point, it was, we're getting really close to the end of the year. There's concerts. There is the drama club here at school. There is event after event after event. And we weren't sure if we were going to be able to schedule a time for this contact. So I basically said, we had state testing as well. So I said, we're going to do our best. But if you could do us a favor and give us a time and date, and we will make it happen. But we try to make it rock solid. So then next after that, they sent us a list of approximately 20 different opportunities using ground stations from all over the world. And we were to prioritize them, what would work best for us. So I prioritized the list, and I basically just responded, hey, if any one of these will happen, any one of these will work, we're going to make it happen no matter what. So it doesn't matter priority to us. We'll move around whatever we need to do. School lunches, state tests, exams, that type of thing. So we are ready to go for this. And so we were eventually scheduled for Tuesday, June 4th. And as soon as I found out, I tried to, it was right after I released episode 149, I got confirmation that it was going to happen. So I put out an email that it was Tuesday, June 4th. This was it. It's going to happen now. And by Friday of that week, I got home. I was all excited, about ready to go for a walk, and I got an email saying that it was now postponed to Thursday, June 6th. And so after being rescheduled 6 times, rescheduled 5 times, it did get a little frustrating. And I was a little upset at the fact that it got rescheduled, and not necessarily because I here's the thing. What upset me the most was that with the reschedule, every single time that it happened, I'd have to contact the media, I'd have to contact the teachers, students, anybody else involved, the local chamber of commerce, and social media posts. So every time the date got scheduled, I'd have to do that, and we rescheduled. I'd have to let them know it got canceled or bumped, and the local newspapers. And so it was just a whole lot more work on my part than really needed to be. And that's why I tried to say, okay, let's set a time and date, and you let us know when it's going to work, and we'll be there. We'll be ready to go. So by the time we got bumped again on June 4th, I was not very pleased. So we basically took that, and I explained to them, this is the end of the year. We've been working on this for 15 months now. It's either going to be June 6th or it's not going to be anything at all. And I was ready to pull my application just because it didn't seem like we were being taken seriously at that point. And not on the fault of ARISS, the ARISS project, but it seems obviously NASA has higher priorities, which makes perfect sense. I mean, think about it. It's a space station orbiting in low Earth orbit. We're the last thing on their list, I'm sure, at this point. But a lot of schools do this. A lot of schools don't get rescheduled. So we were a little frustrated, let's just say, just more out of exhaustion and mental exhaustion than anything else. So we got bumped to June 6th. Now, that week of June was a really busy week last week. I had a concert Saturday, high school concert on Tuesday night. I had another concert Wednesday night. And I get home after a 3-hour concert on Wednesday night, and I find that another email, and I thought they were going to reschedule again, but it wasn't that. But what happened is I got an email concerning the questions that students are going to ask. Now, I submitted the questions back in March, and I picked 16 students to ask questions, and we're supposed to ask 20 questions. So I only picked 16 students in the unlikely event that we run out of time, that all the students would get their question answered. So once we got to 16, then we'd start over with student number 1 and do 17, 18, 19, 20, and some students would get a chance to ask 2 questions. Well, Wednesday night, those plans were thrown out the window, and NASA decided to reorder the questions. Now, this was the first time that anybody at ARISS had really ever seen this before. And so at this point, I was pretty upset that, and I had told them the reason why I had picked these questions in this particular order. So a few students got bumped around. One student in particular got bumped way to the end that didn't get to ask a question. Other students got to ask 2 questions right in a row, not in a row, but before this one particular student got to ask a question. So it was kind of unfortunate that they, at the very last minute, took the questions and reassembled and disassembled them. So with that, Thursday morning rolls around. After 3 concerts so far, we basically I got up at, I don't know, probably 5 in the morning, drove to work early. We got all set up, and here I am testing the audio to make sure that everything's set in stone, because I don't want any problems on my end. You know, they always say this is a giant experiment with everything, and there are many things that could possibly go wrong. So I wanted to make sure I've done my part. If something else goes wrong, it's not my fault. We'll deal with it. And so I get everything set up. Everything in the auditorium is working great. I make a test phone call. Test phone call works great. I can hear that person over the speakers. We're good to go. We go have lunch. Kids come in around 11 o'clock, and we start to practice. The practice goes really well. We give the kids the run through of everything that they need to know, where to be, where to sit, what's happening here, there, everywhere. We're good to go. 12 o'clock comes around, and we're supposed to call in to a ground station in Perth, Australia. And that is the ground station that offered a live stream for us at the very last minute of their amateur radio station, which worked out really nicely because the setup that I had on the stage, we had a center screen with that live stream from Australia. We had to the left of that, we had a slideshow of International Space Station images. And to the right of that, we had another screen with the International Space Station tracking software being shown there. So it was a really nice touch. And one of the last things that I thought of was actually a countdown, similar to what you would see for rocket launches and such. So I had an old TV that actually belonged to my grandfather, and I thought it would be a nice touch to kind of have that in there. And counting down, we hooked up our one of our school laptops to the TV and had a countdown to contact. And so the setup on stage was really nice. And 12 o'clock comes around, and I call in at 11:57 because I'm ready to go for this, and we're all set, ready to go. I call in, I can hear all the ARISS volunteers talking to each other. I didn't really want to interrupt, and all of the sudden I say hello. We're about ready to test the audio, and I have zero audio in the auditorium. Zero. Nothing is working. I can hear them, they can hear me over the phone. I can talk on the microphone. Zero sound in the auditorium. Now, I've worked for weeks to get that set up and be flawless. There's got to be something on their end. Got to be something on their end. I run to the soundboard way in the back of the auditorium. I turn it off. I boot it back up. I'm running around. I'm looking at all my settings on my iPad. Everything's unmuted. Have no idea what the problem is whatsoever. And kids start coming into the auditorium. Elementary students start walking in for the assembly. And we're supposed to do our sound check for all the students. They're supposed to run through their questions with Australia so that they can make sure their audio levels are set correctly. And I'm just about ready to, I said, that's it. Here we go. Here comes the plane crash. It's imminent now. And I just happened to I looked down at my Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, and there is actually a direct monitor switch, and it was switched to the off position, and I switched it on, and immediately I had the sound back on. I must have switched it off for some reason for something earlier in the day, but the direct monitor needed to be on so the audio would be put out through the outputs in the back of the box. And luckily, the sound came back on. So big relief. The students are doing their audio checks now at this point. I look down at my phone and I see emails now that there are wicked storms in Australia and heavy downpour of rain, wind, you name it, and it could affect contact. So they tell me there's a backup station farther along the track of the space station that they could contact. They'd probably only be able to get a few questions in, though, because of the angle in the sky the space station was at. So I told some of the other advisors about it, and at this point it wasn't looking good at all, and we were actually quite concerned. So we run through all of the audio checks. The students do a great job, and we had been practicing with the students for weeks. And on and off, we had a couple of attempts to practice. So the students were aware what they needed to do in order to speak clearly into a microphone. And we start the event. I open it up and I turn it over. I didn't want the event to be about me. I wanted it to be about the students and a learning experience for the students. So I turned it over to another staff member who gave them facts about the International Space Station, a little bit of facts about amateur radio. Back to me, I do some thank yous. And then the formal program begins. The kids come in after we play a video. Kids nail their questions. We got through about 17 or 18 questions. And then the space station, we lost contact because the space station was over the horizon. So you can actually hear them calling the backup station to try to say their final goodbyes to the space station. But at that point, the space station was farther along and out of range of that station as well. So all in all, it was an absolutely wonderful experience. And to me, the coolest thing was seeing the student growth from early March when we had our first interviews for press. The students didn't really want to talk to the press. They weren't really sure what to say or what to do. And we went through the audio training, how to get in front of a microphone, talk clearly in front of a microphone. and go from there. As time went on, they got really good at speaking in front of a microphone. Their confidence built up. They all did a good job. Some of them were nervous, and that's okay. It's perfectly acceptable to be nervous. That's the best thing, is seeing the student growth. They couldn't stop talking after the event. They thought it was really cool hearing the astronaut talking back to them. One moment of panic that everybody had as the ground station was calling out, it didn't get a response the first time. And luckily I had seen enough videos to know that usually the first or second, maybe even third time, sometimes they don't hear the astronaut call back right away. So I was ready for it. But like I said, any problems are likely to come up. So I had watched a video of an ARISS contact that was unsuccessful. They could not contact the space station. And I was hoping that wasn't going to happen to us. But it did. The astronaut called back, and at that moment, I had tears in my eyes at one point in time. I'm sure other teachers did as well, because it was a long effort. And the things that this astronaut had to say were really great. Talking about working with other countries, about Earth being the only thing that they can see that's alive. Everything else in space is dead. And really just showing you exactly what makes it all worthwhile, for sure. And so after the kids wrapped up everything, we stopped the live stream. They all got interviewed. They did a fantastic job talking with the press. There was a great news release. There was a great newspaper article written. And so as much as I sort of complained to many of my family and friends about this whole process, this process was a good example for students about persistence and perseverance and seeing something through to the end. I have nothing but positive things to say about ARISS. In the weeks coming up to the contact, they worked so hard to get us to have a good experience. They made every opportunity that they could to do that. Sure, things along the way, there's some personality differences or just misunderstandings along the way. There was things that got dropped and emails that weren't sent at certain points in times. But the mentor that we worked with was really great, professional. He knew how, when I was upset about something, he was very apologetic and reassuring. The moderator in Atlanta, John Clute, was the one that sent us the equipment that we needed to borrow. So it was great to, which immediately afterwards I put it in the box and I was able to send it right back to him. I wanted to get it on its way, so to speak. And then after that, having somebody to contact on the other side of the world, so to speak, to help us out making that signal to the space station. It was just a cool thing, a cool day. And we're so excited that it was as successful as it was. We're very happy to have that opportunity. And I have nothing but super positive things to say about it. And more importantly, the students here at the school had an opportunity that they've never had before. And that to me is about as much as I can say. It was just a wonderful experience. And if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's kind of fun. And that's going to do it for this week. I didn't realize I've been rambling now for close to a half an hour about this. But thank you for sticking with me through this process for the last year. I know I've talked about it quite a bit. Now I don't have anything to complain about, so I guess I have to move on to other topics. So that's going to do it for this week. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next time.